the jam rifle. The ball brush snagged, a jarring halt in Omar's meticulous routine. A muttered curse escaped his lips, the acrid scent of solvent stinging his nostrils. He leaned into the cleaning rod, ignoring the nervous flutter in his fingers. The colonel's inspection loomed, a stark deadline, and his ancestral rifle seemed determined to betray him. Yesterday's disastrous practice echoed, the drill sergeant's bark, the synchronized stomp of boots, culminating in that damning sound, a lifeless click. The bolt remained frozen, a stubborn refusal to feed around. The colonel's face, an impassive mass of disapproval, flashed in his mind. "Hossan," he thundered, his voice a glacial snap. "You dare present this as readiness?" Omar attacked the ingrained carbon fouling with renewed vigor. His grandfather, a legend of the desert campaigns, could strip and reassemble this weapon in total darkness. His father, a decorated sniper, could thread a needle with a bullet at impossible distances. Inadequacy gnawed at him, a familiar ache. He was a pale imitation of their valor. He recalled his father's rough hands guiding him, teaching him the rifle's anatomy before he'd mastered the alphabet. "Respect this steel, Omar," he'd instructed. "It is shield and provider." Now, the cold metal felt like an accusation, a stark reminder of his own shortcomings. He wrestled the brush free, a screech of metal on metal piercing the air. Patch after patch followed, until each emerged pristine. The bolt clicked back together, his movements sharp, borderline desperate. The action cycled, the sleek kochang offering a sliver of comfort. But the memory of that empty click persisted, a shadow over his resolve. What if it recurred? What if, under the judging eyes of the entire company, his weapon faltered? The humiliation would be a brand. He could almost hear the jeers. "Hossan, whose rifle choked in the drill?" He squeezed his eyes shut, envisioning his grandfather's unwavering gaze, then his father's encouraging grin. He had to rise to the occasion. He had to honor their memory. He seized a fresh magazine, seating it firmly with a decisive thud. He chambered around, the bolt whispering forward with newfound smoothness. He drew a long breath, the scent of gun oil a weak shield against the rising anxiety. He would not, could not, fail. Echoes of the colonel. Omar's fingers, sleek with perspiration, grappled with the bulky breech of the Lee Enfield. Usually a model of smooth operation, it was now stubbornly locked. A trickle of sweat snaked into his eye, blurring his vision. He blinked, the stern visage of Colonel Hossan materializing in his mind, a face carved from granite, his lips a razor-thin line of disapproval. Hassan's voice, a resonant boom that could quell the fiercest simum, echoed, "Precision, Hossan. Your ancestor would despair at such incompetence." His grandfather, the fabled Sergeant Hossan, a thorn in Rommel's side. A legacy that often felt more like shackles than laurels. The burden of expectation settled heavily on Omar, making his grip falter. A curse escaped his lips, lost to the immensity of the desert. The sun hammered down, a brutal weight on his shoulders. He could almost feel the colonel's critical gaze boring into his back, though the man was leagues away, likely immersed in reports or delivering a dressing down to some unfortunate recruit. Omar fought the stubborn rifle. His pulse thrummed in his ears. He couldn't afford to fail. Not with Hossan. Not with the weight of his lineage pressing down on him. He pictured the colonel's icy disappointment, the terse dismissal, the stinging humiliation of reassignment. The image was a goad. He offered a silent plea to his grandfather, begging for guidance, for fortitude, for a sliver of the sergeant's renowned skill. He inhaled deeply, summoning focus. To hell with the colonel, the legacy, the fear. Only the rifle mattered. Only the jam mechanism. Only the need to set it right. He conjured a mental blueprint of the rifle's core, the intricate ballet of its components. With newfound resolve, he exerted pressure on the release. A sharp click resonated. The breech yielded. A wave of giddying relief swept over him. He reloaded swiftly, the movement now instinctual, precise. The rifle was primed. He was ready. For the moment, at least. Disassembly. The rifle lay scattered across the worn grey cloth, its components catching glints of the brutal desert sun like scattered jewels of steel. Omar's breath caught. This was the moment. Deconstruction. He had to isolate the cause of the malfunction that had plagued his weapon during training. Failure was unthinkable, his lineage was entwined with the regiment's history. He lifted the bolt carrier group, its weight a familiar comfort in his weathered hand. His fingertip traced the cool steel, seeking any flaw, any deviation from perfection. Finding none, he set it down, a soft metallic chime against the cloth. The firing pin was next. He narrowed his eyes, brow furrowed in fierce concentration, scrutinizing the point. Seemingly flawless, yet. He grabbed an oily rag and meticulously cleaned the pin, each movement precise, a ritual. His grandfather, a regimental legend, had instilled this patience. A rifle is like a trusted companion, Omar, he'd said, treat her with respect, and she will never abandon you. He moved to the extractor, a minuscule, complex piece. This, he knew, was a frequent offender when jams occurred. He used his knife tip to gently probe the extractor claw, seeking any trapped grit or foreign particle. He blew on it, wiped it down once more, his gaze intense, lips pressed into a tight line. Still no obvious culprit. Doubt began to creep in, a chilling desert wind. What if he couldn't diagnose the problem? What if the colonel's confidence wavered? The mere thought sent a shiver through him despite the oppressive heat. His family's legacy, his own future prospects, all hinged on this. He picked up the upper receiver, rotating it slowly in his hands, hoping for a telltale sign, some clue to the source of the issue. The cool metal offered no answers, only the heavy burden of expectation. The missing spring. The rifle, a relic older than his grandfather's stories, finally clicked. Omar Hossain wiped sweat from his brow, the desert heat clinging to him even in the tomb's depths. There, Colonel, he said, offering the weapon. Good as new, inshallah. Colonel Forrest, a man carved from granite and sand, took the rifle, his gaze distant. See that it stays that way, Hossain. This piece is older than your bloodline. Omar flushed, a familiar sting of inadequacy. His bloodline was all he had, really. He'd rather not be reminded his skills lagged behind his heritage. He fiddled with his tools, double-checking everything. He couldn't afford another mistake. Not here. Not now. Then it happened. As he disassembled a smaller pistol, a spring, no bigger than his thumbnail, slipped from his grip. A high, metallic ping echoed in the oppressive silence before it vanished. You Allah! Omar breathed, scrambling. He dropped to his knees, his fingers scrabbling on the cold, unforgiving stone. Dust billowed, tasting of ancient secrets and decay. Where did it go? The colonel's silence was a heavier weight than any reprimand. Omar's heart hammered against his ribs. The spring was crucial, without it, the pistol was useless. He crawled, his eyes scanning the shadows that danced in the flickering lamplight. The tomb stretched around him, a vast, echoing labyrinth, indifferent to his panic. Each shadow seemed to mock him, a grinning gin waiting to swallow his hope. He imagined the spring, tumbling into some unseen crevice, lost forever among the bones of forgotten kings. The colonel was going to be furious and the mission would be compromised. His stomach twisted. The vastness of the tomb amplified his despair, turning a small mistake into a monumental catastrophe. He was just one man, alone in the dark, searching for a speck of metal in an ocean of stone. Unexpected arrival. The curse of the desert was sand, fine and insidious, finding its way into every crevice of existence, including the firing mechanism of a perfectly good Kalashnikov. Omar cursed under his breath, his fingers slick with weapon oil. The tomb's air hung thick and heavy, a cloying mix of dust and something ancient, something akin to dried spice. He'd been at this for hours, stripped the rifle down 3 times, and the damn thing still jammed. He was supposed to be ready. They were supposed to be ready. Then he heard it. A distinct thud that resonated through the stone walls, followed by the unmistakable echo of polished boots against the cold floor. Someone was approaching. Fast. Omar's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. It was too early. He wasn't ready. Panic clawed at his throat. He scrambled to reassemble the rifle, his movements clumsy and rushed. The boots stopped just outside the chamber entrance. A long shadow stretched across the floor, cutting through the dim light cast by Omar's sputtering lantern. Omar. The voice was a low growl, familiar and laced with an impatience that sent a shiver down Omar's spine. Colonel Farid Hossein. Omar swallowed hard, forcing himself to stand. He snapped to attention, the half-assembled rifle clattering to the stone floor. Colonel Hossein. I wasn't expecting you so soon. The colonel stepped into the chamber, his presence immediately filling the space, pushing the oppressive atmosphere into the corners. He was a mountain of a man, his uniform immaculate, his face a stern mask carved from granite. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something else, something that Omar couldn't quite decipher. The colonel's gaze swept over the chamber, taking in the disassembled weapons, the scattered equipment, and Omar's own disheveled appearance. He paused, his eyes narrowed, on the insignia sewn onto Omar's shoulder, a small, faded patch depicting a stylized falcon. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it appeared. Obviously, he said, his voice dry. What precisely is the state of readiness, Omar? Exposed. Omar's fingers fumbled with the bolt carrier group, the cool, oiled steel slick against his sweaty palms. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the tomb's entrance, each particle a tiny, mocking spotlight on his inadequacy. He hadn't managed to reassemble the damn thing, and now Colonel Farid was back, his boots echoing ominously on the ancient stone floor. Panic tightened Omar's chest. He scrambled, shoving the disassembled rifle parts beneath the frayed edge of a tapestry depicting some long-dead pharaoh. The tapestry smelled of decay and desperation. He smoothed it down, hoping, praying it looked undisturbed. Omar, the colonel's voice boomed, the sound bouncing off the tomb's curved ceiling. How fast a maintenance? Omar swallowed, forcing a smile. Almost finished, Colonel. Just a minor adjustment. He hated how his voice trembled, betraying his lie. The colonel advanced, his shadow engulfing Omar. Farid's gaze, sharp and assessing, swept over the workbench, lingering a fraction too long on the slightly bulging tapestry. Omar's heart hammered against his ribs. He could smell the colonel's aftershave, a sharp, citrusy scent that always made him feel small. Adjustment? Farid repeated, his voice dangerously soft. He reached out, his hand hovering over the tapestry. Show me. Omar's mind raced. He could feign ignorance, claim he didn't understand. But the colonel wasn't a fool. He would see through the deception in an instant. He licked his dry lips. "Colonel, with all due respect, I wouldn't want you to." Farid's eyes narrowed, the lines around them deepening. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating like the tomb's ancient dust. His gaze never left Omar's face as his hand closed on the tapestry, pulling it back with a swift, decisive movement, revealing the jumble of rifle parts beneath. The metal gleamed dully in the dim light, a stark accusation. "Explain this, Omar," Farid said, his voice a low growl. The air crackled with unspoken fury. "The falcon patch." Omar swallowed, the grit in his throat mirroring the anxiety churning in his gut. He spread the disassembled rifle parts across the cold stone floor of the tomb, the metallic tang sharp in the still air. The scent of dust and something ancient clung to everything, amplifying his feeling of inadequacy. Each piece, a dark testament to his failure. He should have fixed it hours ago. "Here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He pointed to the firing pin, its tip blunted and worn. "This is the primary problem, Colonel. And the gas piston, see the scoring? It's binding." Colonel Farid Hossain didn't respond immediately. He stood, a granite statue in the flickering lamplight, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the hieroglyphic-covered wall. Omar couldn't decipher his expression, the man's face a mask of controlled impatience. Finally, he stepped closer, the heavy thud of his boots echoing in the confined space. But instead of examining the rifle components, his gaze locked onto something else. Omar shifted uncomfortably. Had he missed something? Another critical flaw. The colonel reached out, his callous fingers hovering just above Omar's left shoulder. "That patch," he said, his voice low and gravelly, the sound sending a shiver down Omar's spine. Omar followed his gaze. It was the falcon. Hand-stitched onto the worn fabric of his uniform, a stylized representation of the bird in flight, its wings spread wide against a crimson sun. The thread was faded, the edges frayed from wear, but the image remained vibrant, a splash of color against the drab olive green. He'd almost forgotten it was there. A reminder of something lost, something he could never live up to. The colonel's finger finally made contact, tracing the outline of a wing. His touch was surprisingly gentle. The lamplight glinted off something metallic nestled within the falcon's eye, a single, tiny bead of silver thread, almost invisible. "Where did you get this, Omar?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The colonel's eyes, usually hard and unyielding, held a flicker of something, recognition? Or perhaps, something more akin to fear. Echoes of the past. Omar cursed under his breath, the rifle's bolt refusing to budge. The humid air of the tomb clung to him, thick with the scent of dust and decay. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of grime across his forehead. He felt the colonel's gaze on him, judging, and a wave of inadequacy washed over him. He was no soldier, not like his grandfather, not like the man he'd seen in the old photographs. Colonel Farid Hossain hadn't moved since entering the tomb, an impassive statue carved from desert stone. But now, a flicker of something, surprise? Recognition? Softened the harsh lines etched around his eyes. His gaze was fixed on Omar's shoulder, on the faded patch he'd sewn there, a clumsy attempt to honor his grandfather. "That patch," the colonel said, his voice low, a rumble that echoed in the confined space. "Where did you get it?" Omar swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He hadn't expected the colonel to notice, let alone comment. It was my grandfather's, Colonnel. He wore it during the wars. The colonel's eyes narrowed. Colonnel wore a Falcon unit patch. The question was almost a whisper, tinged with disbelief. Omar straightened, his nervousness momentarily forgotten. Yes, sir. He was very proud of his service. He'd heard stories, of course, whispered tales of his grandfather's bravery, of his quiet competence that had earned him the respect of his fellow soldiers. Old Man Colonnel, they'd called him, a silent sentinel, a bulwark against the storm. The Falcon unit, the colonel's voice trailed off, lost in thought. His gaze drifted to the tomb's shadowed corners, as if searching for something unseen. That was a long time ago. Before my time, even. My grandfather spoke of them, of their courage in the face of impossible odds. He said they were the shield that protected the heart of the nation. He turned back to Omar, his expression intense. Tell me, Omar Hossain, what do you know of your grandfather's service in the Falcon unit? A shared legacy. Omar swallowed, the metallic tang of fear coating his tongue. Colonel Hossain hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even frowned, but the disappointment radiating from him was a physical weight. The missing spring was nowhere to be seen. Lost it, have you? The colonel's voice was flat. Omar mumbled an apology, scrambling through the dust again, heart hammering against his ribs. He felt the colonel's gaze, heavy and critical, boring into his back. Stand aside, the colonel said, surprisingly. He knelt, his khakis gathering dust, and began his own search, his movements economical and precise. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the scrape of metal on stone. Finally, with a grunt, the colonel held up the tiny spring, glinting dully in the tomb's gloom. Always pay attention, Omar, he said, handing it over. Details matter. Lives depend on them. Omar took the spring, shamefaced. He expected a lecture, punishment maybe. Instead, the colonel surprised him. Colonnel would have found it, he said, almost to himself. Omar's head snapped up. You knew my grandfather? A ghost of a smile touched the colonel's lips. Knew him. Colonnel was a legend. Quiet, stoic, but brave as a lion. Never complained, never faltered. I saw him single-handedly hold off a group of insurgents for almost an hour, giving his squad time to regroup. Omar stared, picturing the grandfather he barely remembered as a titan. He'd only heard stories from his mother, tales of a loving man who always had time for a game. He never knew about this legendary man. He was a master with a rifle, the colonel continued, his eyes distant. Could strip one down blindfolded and put it back together in the dark. The colonel gestured to the disassembled rifle. Let's finish this. Together, they worked. The colonel's guidance was firm but patient, his hands calloused but deft. Omar found himself relaxing, his anxiety receding as the pieces clicked into place. He noticed the colonel's hands, the way they moved with an ingrained familiarity. Finally, the rifle was whole. The colonel chambered around, the sharp click echoing in the tomb. There, he said, handing it back. Good as new. As the colonel turned to leave, he paused at the entrance. Your grandfather loved this country, Omar. He served with honor. Remember that. Then he was gone, leaving Omar alone in the tomb, the repaired rifle heavy but somehow lighter in his hands. He ran his fingers over the cool metal, a new feeling blooming in his chest, pride.